This is a circle. This is absolutely a circle. No, it's a rectangle. The truth of this object is that it's a rectangle. So which one is it? The conflict isn't really there.
The truth of the object is that it's neither. Both are just representations, different vantage points of what the object really is. It's a cylinder. People have gone to war over these different viewpoints, but both the rectangle and the circle are correct from different perspectives. Now, they're not entirely correct. They're only partial truths of the underlying reality, the cylinder. This is a metaphor from the idealist philosopher Bernardo Kastrup. I recommend you read all of his books and watch all of his YouTube videos. I'll link below. His work has given me rational permission to believe in an absolute truth. He provides very logical and coherent reasoning behind it. But that's jumping ahead. Why does there need to be any absolute truth in the first place? We can get an idea of how anything we think and believe is relative to our own perspectives and interpretations compared to someone else's. We may argue that this only applies to our individual opinions and that there is a consensus reality out there based on our laws of nature. But even with physics, we can get a sense of how the apparent reality we perceive is relative, and that the physical world isn't as concrete as we would think. Just serving the titles of our best scientific theories over the last 100 years or so can give us an idea of that. Einstein's theory of relativity, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle in quantum physics, Gödel's incompleteness theorem in math and logic. It seems hard to pin down an absolute reality when just looking at the physical world. And yet, anyone who says that there's no absolute truth is making an absolute statement. We have an intuition that there must be an absolute ground of existence. Even if we believed we were just our individual minds and bodies, we have an intuition that we must have come from somewhere. And whatever that is, it must be bigger than us, prior to us, and the foundation of anything that exists. We have a sense that there has to be an absolute foundation to reality out of which all apparent things arise, an absolute truth out of which all relative truths arise. In a world of relativity, there must be something absolute to ground it. An absolute is that which always exists and has no opposite. Materialist scientists would want this absolute to be some sort of quantum particle or field or membrane. And most wisdom traditions would agree on absolute, but not a physical one. The premise of the Advaita non-dual teachings I've been covering in recent videos is that reality is fundamentally one whole entity. Like the reality of the cylinder, it's one whole block that looks like a circle or a rectangle from different perspectives. If we apply this metaphor to our reality, there would be a collapse of the distinction between me and you, self and other, mind and matter, God and the world. That's what's meant by the term Advaita in Sanskrit, meaning not two. We share our being with all other living beings, and in fact with the entire universe. There's a single reality underlying the apparent diversity of all the people, animals, and objects of the universe. So everything that exists is ultimately one thing. What else can we say about that one thing? Advaita says that that one existent thing is consciousness. Since everything we know to exist exists in consciousness, that reality must be consciousness itself. So there's only one consciousness. But unlike the cylinder of our metaphor, this consciousness is said to be indescribable in words and logic, because it's not the consciousness that we normally experience, full of specific ideas, images, and forms. It's an infinite consciousness. It has to be if we're saying it's a ground of everything that exists. But how do we conceive of that, let alone describe it? Eastern spiritual traditions refer to the world as an illusion, meaning it's just an apparent reality. The actual reality is this infinite consciousness we're talking about. The apparent reality is like the worlds we conjure up in our nightly dreams. I'll cover this topic in a future video. But I figured the Dream Space exhibit in this shopping center will serve some appropriate imagery here. How can we awaken to or realize this underlying reality if it can't be conceptually grasped? Can we at least point to this indescribable, infinite consciousness? Bernardo Kastrup says that's exactly what religious stories do in his book, More Than Allegory. Religious stories point to this underlying truth, but he also mentions the more direct, story-free approach to grasping this reality. To investigate the truth, we can start with ourselves. That's what we have the most immediate and direct access to, our own minds and experiences. But we're obviously limited to our own bodies and our own mental activities. Why does there have to be an absolute behind it all? Can't we just identify with our temporary mind-body complexes that will eventually pass away? One answer is that we don't have that experience of being temporary and limited. We do have temporary and limited thoughts and perceptions, but we have a continuity of experiencing all those thoughts and perceptions. If those thoughts and perceptions change or go away, I would still exist. We have that sense of ourselves being absolute. We have the sense of our existence being absolute. We can't even imagine ourselves before our birth or after our death. We can't imagine what that non-existence would be like. We exist through all the variety of experiences we've had. We exist through all the change our minds and bodies go through. What is that thing that is perpetually existing? It's what we call I, as in I am. That's the absolute. As I mentioned in my last video, physicalists would like to reduce that sense of I to something in the brain or nervous system, but still haven't been able to do so. But since anything we ever experience is in consciousness, the more plausible explanation would be that this sense of I is consciousness itself, pure consciousness, not our personal limited form of consciousness. It has to be a pure consciousness if that's where everything manifests from. It's the subject out of which all objects arise. Our thoughts, feelings, and perceptions are all objects of awareness in that consciousness. I am that pure subjectivity, before all those objects are introduced into my awareness. That aware being is primary. That's the absolute.
At least that's how I now understand it. But to actually believe it is another story. To deep down in my bones actually identify with this absolute being doesn't seem to come so easily.
I've been identifying with my mind and body for so long. I've been protecting it, building it up, and seeking to gratify it. Even if I can understand what a deeper part of me really is, I must not really believe it. Because if I did, I wouldn't be disturbed when things don't go my way. I wouldn't be trying to please the ego. I wouldn't experience struggle, distress, and suffering. I would be enlightened. But that's where spiritual practices fit in, and I like to cover them all in future videos. Like and comment if this resonated with you, and subscribe below to follow me on my journey. See you next time.